Should Lando Norris be happy with the year he's had this year in Formula 1? Let's get into it. With Max having taken his 4th World Drivers' Championship this weekend at the Las Vegas Grand Prix, Lando's hopes of a first World Drivers' Championship with McLaren are gone. Although it was never really on, I want to take a look back at the year and see what could have been. Firstly, I want to take a look at what Lando did well this year, and I think it is important to remember that this was Lando's first year winning a race even. Aside from that stunning 2021 Sochi pole position lap that Lando had, and numerous podiums for McLaren, this is the first time that he's actually been fighting in the front. In contrast, Max Verstappen has been winning races since 2016, where of course he had that incredible debut for Red Bull Racing at the Spanish Grand Prix, where Lewis and Nico decided to have a cuddle coming out of turn 4. So Max has won races in 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and then 2021, of course, he had his first championship battle with Lewis. So you could certainly argue that Max was a lot more prepared for his first championship battle than Lando was this year. There's also the fact that the 21 season started the way that it did, with Max and Lewis only being separated by 7 tenths at the flag in the Bahrain Grand Prix, meaning that both drivers knew it was going to be a battle from day one. Plus, with the McLaren only coming good at the midpoint of the year, it's easy to see how McLaren didn't have huge hopes. Fast forward today, where they are leading the Constructors' Championship and wondering what could have been for Lando. I think Lando has shown this year in a couple of races that he is capable of dominating a race when he is at the front. He won the Dutch GP by almost 23 seconds. Miami is an interesting race to talk about because obviously Lando did benefit massively from the safety car, he admits that himself. But the safety car did come in with 25 laps to go. So although he did benefit from that, Max had 25 laps to try and chase him down, and he wasn't able to do it with Lando finishing almost 8 seconds ahead of him. Unfortunately for Lando, that sort of is where the good ends. He did, of course, get a number of pole positions this year, but we'll get into that. Obviously, there were of course many instances where points were lost, some big, some small, but the final nail in the coffin did come at the 2024 Brazilian Grand Prix, where Max showcased, much like he did at the track in 2016, that he is a master of those conditions, and showed that on the day where the car isn't the best, he's still able to dominate. Lando took a number of poles this year, both in the Grand Prix and in the sprint races. Out of all of the pole positions this year, the only time he managed to stay ahead after lap 1 was at Singapore, where of course he did go on to dominate and win by 20 seconds. At the time, Sky Sports analyst Simon Lazenby dubbed it a champion's drive, which I think is a nice sentiment, but somewhat premature. And I honestly don't think that McLaren nor Lando were really in a championship mindset for most of that year. The Turn 1 trauma. Lando's first pole of the year came at the Chinese sprint race. Lando did get a poor start at this race and was alongside with Lewis going around the sweeping turn 1. Lando ended up bailing out of the move and getting pushed off and dropping down to 7th position, and only recovering back to 6th, with Max going on to win the race that day. At the Spanish Grand Prix, it looked like Lando had a better launch. Unfortunately, in the second phase, Max did manage to pull alongside him and squeeze him on the apex of turn 1. Max then went on to win, with Lando in P2 and Lewis in P3. In Hungary, again he got a poor start, leading to his teammate Oscar Piastri pulling alongside him into turn 1. This led to Max being pushed off the track, where he promptly put his foot down and steamed ahead of Lando. Lando was of course leading that race before the team did tell him to give the position back to Oscar, which you could argue was a mistake, but honestly I don't think it was worth irritating Oscar that early on in the season when Lando's championship really wasn't on at that stage. At the Dutch Grand Prix, once again Lando took pole. It's a very short run down to turn 1, but Max got a mega start and was easily ahead before the braking zone. Lando did, however, manage to regain the lead on lap 18 and led to the flag, even dropping a cheeky Simply Lovely at the end of the race. Italy was the first time where Lando actually managed to stay ahead into turn 1, and I know what you're thinking, the curse is lifted, Lando 2024 champion, it is on. What we didn't account for though was an ice-cold Australian man with a Tim Tam addiction throwing it around him at turn 4. I can only assume that Lando just didn't expect Oscar to dive bomb him there. That was a real statement move from Oscar though. Next up is Singapore, where of course Lando led lights to flag and looked like a dominant driver that day. Unfortunately for Lando, much is the theme of when Lando wins, Max is always coming home in P2, so the point swing is never big in Lando's favour. Next up is one of my favourite racetracks, Austin. This is honestly a hard one to defend as a Lando fan. I don't get why he didn't cover the inside. We see this every year at turn 1. I don't know what Lando was thinking not covering the inside. He left the door wide open for Max to throw a dive bomb, and if you're going to give Max the opportunity to dive bomb, he's going to dive bomb you. Next up is Brazil, where once again a poor start led to George Russell taking the lead at turn 1. And honestly, Lando never really looked comfortable in these conditions. Usually in the wet, Lando is one of the drivers you would look to have a solid race, but he just never seemed to find the groove that day. possibly it's championship nerves, or he just didn't have the setup right, but Max was in a different class that day. After the race, this was also dubbed as a champion's drive, and I think this is a champion's drive. So where were all of the points lost? The easy answer here is in the first part of the season, where Max took 7 back-to-back pole positions, winning 5 of them. The only 2 he didn't win was of course Miami and in Australia, where he had an engine failure. If it wasn't for the engine failure and that safety car, Max probably would have won all 7, let's be honest. As with every championship battle, it's not without its controversy, and Max and Lando did share a few on-track moments. Max and Lando's first coming together came in the Austrian Grand Prix, where Max was showcasing some of his signature late braking moves. Now there was some questionable defending from Max at this race, but the stewards did deem him to be in the right there. Something that Max does really well is understanding the regulations perfectly and balancing it just on the edge of what's acceptable. Sometimes, yes, he does cross the line and gets penalised when he does, but he knows that as long as he's ahead at the apex, it doesn't really matter what the other driver's doing, he's going to stay in the lead. After the coming together, they both limped back to the pits and Lando jumped out of his car. Max did end up continuing and coming back in P5 and picking up 10 championship points. Fast forward to the Austin GP, where Lando's championship hopes are looking a lot more realistic. Much like in Austria, they did come to blows again. This time they didn't collide in the same way, but there was very similar racing from Max. In fairness, after the race, Lando did say that Max is the best driver in the world at defending, and that you do need to get quite creative when you're battling with him. And again, the stewards thought the same way. They didn't find Max guilty of anything, although they did penalise Lando, of course, for leaving the track and gaining the advantage, dropping him out of the podium. The final time that we did see Max and Lando together came at the Mexican Grand Prix, where honestly there was no excuse for the way that Max was driving that day. I don't know if it was the pressure or if he was just sick of being overtaken at that point. The first issue was when Lando tried to get past Max. Lando, of course, threw to the outside, and Max did his classic late braking at the apex, open up the steering wheel, push him off wide. Lando does now seem to have gotten wise to this and made sure that he was ahead at the apex, so if there was any penalties to be handed out, it wouldn't be for Lando. The move into turn 7 that Max pulled on Lando though was never on. I quite honestly don't understand what he was thinking. I don't know if Max was trying to get Lando to DNF, or if he was just thinking, I'll push him wide and he'll probably lose a few positions. After the race, Max in the media pen did say that that move stopped Lando from winning the race, so it sort of worked out in his favour, which I think was a strange thing to admit to, but Max is Max. But when Max was given 20 seconds of penalties in that race, you can't help but think if he would have just let Lando by and had a normal race, he probably wouldn't have lost many points to him. So, should Lando be happy with this year? I mean, he's still likely to go on to win the Constructors this year, unless Ferrari can catch them. So that is definitely a positive to take from the year, and if/when he does have a championship battle in the future, I think he'll be a lot more prepared for this one. Lando did say himself that he wasn't really ready for the fight this year, and I think that has shown. It does beg the question though, when will he be ready? Because he's in his 6th year of Formula 1 now. Out of the 3 current champions on the grid, Max took his first title in his 7th year, Fernando in his 4th, and Lewis in only his 2nd year. So how many more years does Lando need to be ready? I am excited to see what next year does bring for Lando and for McLaren. 2025 is promising to be a classic year. We've got Mercedes looking fast, you've got Ferrari looking strong at some weekends, McLaren are looking set to take the Constructors' Championship this year, and Red Bull do seem to be getting on top of the issues they were facing earlier this year. If only they had a second driver that was capable of scoring some points. It seems like Red Bull would really benefit from having some sort of a junior program, or if they had like a development driver, or just something to help young drivers get in the sport. Or not. Please let me know what you think in the comments, if Lando should be proud of this year or not. Personally, I think he can. I mean, like I said, this is the first time he's been winning races since Formula 2 in 2018. And I do think that if Lando can get a better start for the season next year, he could be a serious contender for the title. But I do worry that if Oscar does get on top of his race pace, he could be a threat to Lando. And then you've got Ferrari with Lewis moving there. Charles is not going to be happy about that. Charles is their golden boy, and Ferrari have gone and hired Lewis Hamilton alongside him. Lewis is obviously going to be gunning for that 8th championship, and Charles won't take that lying down. Max, of course, is always a championship contender. And you've got 2 young drivers at Mercedes that are going to want a shot at the title too. That is, of course, unless Adrian Newey builds an absolute rocket ship of a car for 2025. But if he does, I think we all know who's going to win the title next year.